With that, Ian, I will pass it over to you.
All right. Well, thank you. And thanks, everyone, for taking time out of your day to spend the time with us. I realize this is an unaccustomed experience being at home. I'm at home. You're all likely at home. I know many people have been catching up on webinars, so I'm really glad that you're using this opportunity to hear what's going on and educate yourself. The reason that I'm excited about today's topic is, as Jen was saying, there's quite a lot of activity based on the current pandemic that is of interest and that can point the way to a sort of a post-COVID world and how you need to think about coming out of this and what changes your consumers are going to undergo, what they're expecting, and how those expectations have shifted. When we were initially talking about this topic, Jen, Tracy, and I were thinking back to some of the predictions that Forrester had made at the end of last year about what was going to happen in 2020. So pre anybody hearing about the new coronavirus. So I went back and I started thinking about, what has changed because of the current pandemic. And some of the things that we expected to happen very quickly are still happening, but more slowly. And then there are some things that obviously we were not able to foresee that are changing much more quickly. One of the things that is neither of those, something that we expected to happen and is happening much more quickly, is work at home has now become the norm for contact center. We talked to just 5 of the largest providers of contact center infrastructure about how many agents they had helped move to a work at home model. And we got 2 million or so over the past 6 weeks. And I would say that's likely a massive underestimate because we have lots of other contact center providers that we didn't talk to, right? It's just a thumb in the wind to see which direction it's blowing. So work at home, which we already expected to become a major trend in 2020, is now the norm. I mean, there are very few large contact centers that are fully staffed up in brick and mortar models. That, of course, has led to a whole bunch of issues, a whole bunch of poor experiences, millions of poor experiences for consumers, but it's also teaching us how to build a work-at-home customer service organization. Right now, we're thinking about keeping the lights on. We have all these ad hoc technology approaches, ad hoc processes to keep the lights on, to keep the calls being answered, to keep the chats being responded to. But we're now starting to learn enough that we could start to design the ideal work-at-home organization. And in some ways, when we shift this conversation towards conversational AI, it's going to be of a piece with that. Like if this becomes really the new normal and we really start to think about a different contact center labor model, what is the role of automation in that model? So that's one thing that's changed. But there are still holdouts, right? One of the largest outsourcers has got, they were at about 55% at the beginning of last week, moving quickly, but still maybe they're at 60% of their agents working at home. So that means they probably still have about 60,000 agents spread out around the globe working in contact centers, or simply not working because those centers have been closed and they've not been able to move those agents home. So we are in this transition period where we need to start thinking about the future, but you may still be one of those brands struggling with the present. And I want to talk about one of those brands very quickly. India, 1.3 billion people, given not very much notice that they were going to need to work from home and stop working in contact centers or in any kind of office. In many cases, it was less than 24 hours. the brand that I'm talking about in India was happy to have people work at home as long as they were able to use company equipment, as long as they had a locked-down laptop, essentially, because their clients, this is an outsourcer, predictably enough, their clients insisted on the same level of security that they were having in the brick and mortar center. Not sure what happened here. Sorry, my slides are moving the wrong direction. Let's get them going the right place. Here we go. So we're still in India. The problem with this was that many of the agents had not been in that day. They didn't have enough laptops. They actually had sort of Chrome boxes at the cubicles in the contact center. And so this organization had to start negotiating with the governments, the state governments in India, to get special dispensation to start to ship the equipment to the agents, and not ship via mail, actually have truck rolls and have trucks out delivering and installing the equipment and making sure that the security was up to snuff. So you're seeing lots and lots of issues like this that are unexpected. Why am I bringing all of this up? Well, one of the ways that brands have been reacting, and maybe the most common, is how do we shift away from this need to get agents set up and start to provide self-service to our customers? And so the demand for conversational AI has exploded, right? If you cannot easily get your 30,000 agents in India quickly set up, you either shift the volume to somewhere that is better, except that this is a global pandemic, so there really isn't a better option available, or you provide customers a new option. And so as a way to help mitigate some of the explosions in call volume that we've seen, combined with this staffing struggle, we've seen brands turn to conversational AI. Now, initially, the deployments were focused on crisis communication, information about the virus itself, information about the brand's response to the virus. But now we're starting to see the second and third order kind of questions that come out, questions about medical procedures in the healthcare world that are being delayed, questions about not being able to pay your mortgage because you're out of work in the US, for example. So now brands are looking at conversational AI for real CX improvements. And as I joke on the slide here, anything is an improvement over hearing an IVR tell you that the current wait time is 4 hours or 14 hours, or we'd love to call you back and schedule a call back, but that may be 3 days from now. Like, those experiences are awful. So brands are looking for ways to use conversational AI to provide a new experience. So let's dig into the conversational AI piece. And as Jen said initially, with an eye towards what happens when we come out of this crisis, whatever that looks like. But first, let me talk about what I mean by conversational AI. Forrester has a definition for chatbots and for conversational AI that are very similar. It's just that when we talk about chatbots, that means the conversational tools or conversation-like tools that either use a deterministic logic, something like a decision tree, or truly are based on artificial intelligence using things like natural language processing and machine learning to simulate that two-way dialogue between a customer and some technology. And conversational AI is only using artificial intelligence, as the name implies. Why am I making that distinction? Just so you know, when I'm talking about the rest of my presentation, I'm actually thinking about conversational AI. Right? Yes, there are meaningful gains that your brand can get from a deterministic approach, but they are limited. And we'll talk about some of the areas where those limitations come in a little later. So right now, brands are rightfully obsessed with keeping the lights on, right? Answering as many customer inquiries as they can, and they would like to provide a great experience. But coming out of this, I think we're going to go back to this customer-obsessed model that we had, 6 months ago, where customer experience was the top dog in your decision making. The problem is the customer experience has actually stagnated. So every year, Forrester does a massive consumer survey. As you can see here, more than 100,000 consumers. And we ask them about their experiences with specific brands. And we're asking about hundreds of brands across nearly 24 different industries. And you can see that customer experience, despite all of the focus over the last several years, is not actually really improving in any meaningful way. In fact, there are no brands from 2017, 2018, or 2019 that all these consumers adjudged to provide excellent customer experience. None. There were plenty who got good and most got okay, but you're not going to create a competitive differentiation around okay or even good customer experience, right? It comes from excellent experience. So you're focused on experience, but you recognize that what we've been doing hasn't worked. So where should we be looking to invest? And I think you obviously know that I'm going to be talking about conversational AI. But before I dive into that, I want to talk about the way that brands are actually expecting customer engagement to change. So this is not Forrester data. This comes from Dimension Data, now part of NTT Global. And they also do massive surveys every year. It's called the Global CX Benchmarking Report. I recommend everybody go download the executive summary right now because it's amazing. But here we're asking brands, or Dimension Data is asking brands, what they expect to happen based on this focus on digitization and digital transformation. And predictably enough, almost 2/3 of the brands think that their telephone volume will go down. But what's interesting is 2/3 also expect that the number of overall interactions that they're going to have will increase. So voice volume goes down, but overall interactions actually increase. Why? Because there are going to be so many more digital interactions. Once you start opening up all these touch points, people actually use them. I know, it's shocking, right? You say, hey, we are available on WhatsApp, and people start to use WhatsApp to communicate with you. But here's the other interesting thing. Robotic automation, which includes AI, but also things like RPA, brands are expecting great things here, right? More than 88% of brands expect that their robotic automation will increase. 88%, almost everybody. I mean, essentially, that's like almost every brand thinks that's true. So if you think that CX is not improved, CX is important, your volumes are going to increase, and you want to use automation to help handle it, the key obviously seems to be finding how to use automation in a way that drives the benefits that you expect, but more importantly, also drives better customer experiences. And so that is where I'm going to focus the rest of my presentation on. Why have brands been focused on conversational AI before the crisis, and actually in the crisis, as a good example of this, right? It's mostly on cost savings. Volume has spiked tremendously in insurance and financial services and healthcare. In travel and hospitality, we saw those spikes. One way brands could have responded is massive hiring and throwing bodies at the problem. Well, that wasn't really feasible, not only because everybody had to go work at home and it was very difficult to hire new people, but also it was cost prohibitive to do so. And the charter for customer service is always keep costs under control. So there are ways where conversational AI can provide cost savings, but also improve customer experience. And I actually want to give you sort of 5 tips on how you can drive cost savings with conversational AI and drive better customer experience, right? So 5 tips. The first one is start with the right use cases, right? Don't try and automate the things that shouldn't be automated right now. What you see here is a matrix that has volume of customer interactions on one axis and the level of engagement between the consumer and the brand on the other axis. And we think that there are some low-hanging fruit here, the things that are highly repetitive and fast. So high volume, but relatively low levels of engagement. Now, I mentioned earlier that there are some things that you can do with a deterministic kind of rules-based approach. Some of these very simple, highly repetitive tasks can actually be done in a deterministic way. More importantly, I think these are the kind of tasks that brands have been able to do, to automate on their own, essentially, without a huge amount of help. And I think that that is a good place to start. But there is also this other area up top, areas that have very high levels of engagement, right? Things that are complex, being able to make an insurance claim, disputing a bill, looking at credit card fraud, right? These are high engagement levels. There's high emotion involved on the consumer side. There's complex processes on the brand side. And we are seeing brands tackle these topics for conversational automation, but they're doing so with the help of experts. They're essentially asking the experts. And those experts typically are technology vendors who build the solutions for you in conjunction with your people who can help detail those processes and understand what the customer experience is. Interestingly enough, I think the gap has been in the middle. This middle area is where I actually think you're going to look for expertise like we're looking at the top end, and different from what we see in these highly repetitive and simple kind of tasks. So look for these process-laden, guided topics, as well as these things in the middle where the engagement is not as intense as it is for things like a consultative purchase or, again, fraud on a credit card. But there might be some areas where you can pick off a lot of volume and drive better experiences for consumers. So start with the right use cases. Number 2, I think, is a little bit simpler, and that is track the right metrics. Understand that the metrics for conversational AI are not just about the operation of a chatbot or a conversational AI tool. That stuff is of interest to the people who are responsible for improving the quality of that conversational AI, but you're a customer service leader. You're actually focused on the outcomes, on the customer experience, on the impact on your humans in the contact center or now working at home. So looking at engagement engagement metrics, interaction metrics, as well as experience metrics will actually get you all the way. You can't just focus on things like, intent detection. Intent detection and intent recognition, those things are critical, but they are not going to be completely determinative of the experiential goals that you have. And so you need to actually look at metrics across all 3 of these buckets. And again, there are experts who can help you find those metrics. The third tip here is actually something I've just mentioned several times, but this isn't magic, right? It doesn't just happen because it's AI. AI sounds like, it can use machine learning and it will learn without you. Well, that's not actually the way it works. So you need to invest in people that make AI create these good experiences. Those people can be your own team, or they can be outside experts who can bring technology, services, and expertise to bear to create those experiences for you. The 4th tip is to focus on speed. So yes, everybody has now been focused on agile methodologies and building an agile mindset. I actually think that there's two ways to focus on speed. One is to speed up, and the other is to slow down. And my advice is to do both. So when you are picking the right use case, that requires a lot of deliberation. It's not something that you can just, throw everything at the wall and see what sticks. You probably want to use a lot of data, do a lot of analysis, figure out where you have high volume and high engagement, and maybe think that that's the ideal place. Once you've got those use cases, then you switch to an agile mindset where you need to be doing weekly or biweekly sprints. You got to be thinking about minimum viable product and so on, and working with partners who also have that mindset. So go slow until you're ready to go fast, and then go fast. And then the final tip is think about scale from the get-go, right? You might want to start with a conversational experience inside of your native app. You've built messaging into a native app, and that's where you want to start. Or you want to start on your website. But that's probably not where you want to end. You're probably going to want to deploy a conversational experience across multiple different channels. So you need to actually think about how to build this technology or work with a partner who's going to build it for you for the eventual scale that you're going to need. Languages, what kind of language do we want to cover? That could be English, Spanish, French, Romanian, and Urdu, or it could also mean that we want to understand the ways that people talk differently than the way that they type, which are essentially different language models, right? So think about all of these scale issues up front. So you can build cost savings, but you can do that without replacing all of your agents, because that, frankly, is where many brands start. They're thinking about conversational AI. We'll get good enough at this that we won't need our agents. Well, I hate to tell you that's not going to happen, nor should you want it to happen. There are near-term problems with that and long-term problems with that. On the long-term front, you're always going to have issues that are of high emotion and maybe a lot of value to the brand that you want a human being for. If you are an insurer and you offer life insurance and you're doing, a policy claim because somebody died, do you actually want a bot involved in that interaction? No, right? You're not going to actually have long-term customer loyalty there if you're shunting off a very upset consumer to a bot. So you don't want to do that. In the near term, you also don't want to freak out your current agents, right? Nobody wants to play musical chairs with a robot for their job. So automation should feel like it's designed to help your agents, not to replace them wholesale. Now, brands are starting to get that, right? Brands are starting to mouth the right words. They're saying, well, let's use this to free up our agents to do more interesting work so they don't have to do the mindless kind of tasks that make this a terrible job. We hear brands saying, let's improve the speed to proficiency for brand new agents, right? Or allow our tier 1 agents to do some tier 2 work more quickly than they would without this kind of augmentation. I love that. That is the right way to think about it. How? How do you actually go about it? Well, let's look at two quick models. The first is you actually have what would be a chatbot or conversational AI that interacted with a customer, except that you have a human in the loop, an employee of yours in the loop. So from the consumer point of view, it actually looks like, in this case, a web chat interaction between them and an agent. It is an assisted interaction, except that you've got a conversational AI system monitoring that interaction and making suggestions to the agent. Those suggestions can be knowledge articles. They can be media. Here's a video that actually shows the customer how to do the thing that they want to do. Or it could be actual conversational suggestions. The text that conversational AI would push to the customer if there wasn't a human in the loop. Why does it push a suggestion to an agent? Because the agent can then read it and say, yeah, that makes sense. That's a great answer. And then push it out to the customer, or say, yeah, I wouldn't have phrased it exactly that way. And they can modify it, or they can personalize it. Or they can say, stupid bot, I don't know why you thought that was the right answer. Reject that input entirely and put in their own answer. Machine learning is watching what the agent is doing. It's watching the agent's actions to improve the bot over time. You're not experimenting on your customers, which is what would happen if the human wasn't in the loop, right? If the human wasn't in the loop, the bot would push out the wrong answer and the customer would be like, stupid bot, that doesn't help, right? So now you're experimenting on your customers. If you put the agent in the loop, you're now experimenting on your own employees. They are the ones who are actually training the AI to make better suggestions. And yes, maybe eventually you will hit a confidence threshold where you don't need the agent, right? The agents have trained the system enough, so now the bot can actually respond to the simple things that the customers ask. But it's this human intermediated model that really allows you to shift the burden from your customers to your own employees, which is where it belongs. So that's model one. Model two recognizes that bots could help in many different parts of an interaction, and you're truly going to blend the humans and the AI. It could be that the bot just sits at the front end of the interaction, gathers a bunch of information, and hands it off to a human. But as you see in my bottom flow here, it could be that a customer connects with a human agent. Let's assume that this is about internet access. The customer's internet is acting flaky. The agent says, oh, well, that might be a problem with your router. I'm going to transfer you to a diagnostic tool, a conversational diagnostic tool that will work with you to actually do some diagnosis. So then the bot gets on and says, hey, I'm going to send a signal to your router. What color are the lights? And then there is a conversation between the bot and the customer about what they're seeing. And then the diagnosis is done by the bot, and then the diagnosis is handed off to that human who can actually then resolve the problem, right? So it could be that the bot is up front of the interaction. It could be that the bot is in the middle of the interaction. It could be that the bot is at the end of the interaction. What you're doing here is what we talked about a little earlier. You're removing a lot of the mindless work from the agents and allowing them to do the kinds of work that actually helps build strong relationships with your customers. That's important. Let me go back and say what I just said. You're removing the mindless tasks from the workflow of the agent and shifting that to a bot. Why is that important? Well, in every contact center that I know of, the biggest cost is the human piece of the contact center. It's labor. It's not the building. It's not the computers, the headset. It's not the CRM software or agent desktop that they're using. It's the people. Agent churn, agent retention is a critical issue. And if you can make the work of the agents more engaging by offloading the less engaging work to an automation tool, you're going to create a more compelling work experience for your agents and do a much better job at agent retention. This is really counterintuitive, right? Because remember where I started. Many brands, most brands that I talk to, were initially thinking about conversational AI as a way to reduce costs and eventually replace agents. But you should be thinking about it as a way to create much better agent experiences so that you can keep them for those emotionally complex, highly engaged interactions that are make or break for customer relationships, and then let the conversational AI handle everything else. Okay, I am going to leave you with a set of recommendations. These are both for the current COVID moment and for coming out of that, right? So what do we actually have to think about? Well, if you are not a brand who has been thinking about self-service in the ways that I mentioned, right? You've only been thinking about it as a way to cut costs. This situation, this crisis, is acting as a forcing function for many brands to rethink their investment priorities around self-service technologies. I talk to brands like yours every day, and this is the way that the smartest, the savviest are thinking about it. Yeah, we had for conversational AI, and we're going to open up messaging channels, but all of that has been put on the back burner because of X, Y, and Z. Well, now it's back on the front burner, and it really should be. So if you're not thinking about it this way, it is time to recognize that this new reality where we may have a completely different kind of contact center labor with people working from home, where we're going to have complications because they're, there we go, because they're being exposed to the simple conversational AI that you've done. Now you should be thinking about, well, how do we actually take these lessons and change our we want to do. Sorry, my audio seems to keep dropping out here. Okay, the next thing is bring in the experts, right? I actually think of this as a managed services kind of play more so than a technology engagement. Now, I talked about why that is, right? The experts can help you design a solution that combines technology with process improvements and know-how, full know-how, understanding your domain and what the common questions are in your domain that have been automatable in the past, so that you don't have to necessarily do as much upfront work. You can offload that upfront work to these experts that you want to work with. Again, the other thing that I talked about is the different kinds of interactions that might be automatable. And if you think about those highly engaged, process-intensive interactions, you're not likely to succeed doing that on your own. You really do need outside expertise of people who've done it before and who've worked with brands like yours to work out the kinks in your own industry. Okay, the third recommendation is data and context will determine whether you're successful in conversational AI. Okay, I'm just going to let that hang for a second. If you think that through, what that means is you really need to be able to integrate into data sources and context sources to build successful interactions. Why? Without data and context, you probably can build generic interactions that work well, right? What is the opening time of this retail branch when retail branches can open again? The answer that you get and I get asking that question will be exactly the same. But if you want to provide dynamic experiences so that I get a different answer from Jen, you're going to have to dig in to back-end systems. And so you need to look for conversational AI tools that have an integration framework that will allow you to tap into multiple data sources. That means pre-built integrations, so really common data sources like CRM systems and so on, or even things like the weather, as well as an open environment that allows you to create bespoke integrations that matter to your brand, whether that's legacy systems you've built yourself or domain-specific tools critical for your industry but not for others. So remember, data and context will be your key. And then finally, think of the two models that I mentioned here. Agent employee experience matter as much as high automation rates, or they matter as much as the consumer experience in this, because you want to be able to create an environment where automation handles the kinds of interactions where low-touch interactions provide great experiences. But where high-touch matters, you can augment the performance of those agents in such a way that you create, again, a compelling work environment for them and keep your costs down long term because you've lowered agent attrition while automating that which can be automated. So think about agent experience or employee experience as much as you're thinking about customer experience here. With that, I'm actually going to turn this over to my buddy Tracy, who's going to step you through some of the real world work that she and her company do with clients to actually kind of make everything that I said practical. So over to you.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Ian. Really appreciate it. Great information there. And I will say that for the next part of this discussion, we're going to make sure to leave time open, obviously, for questions and encourage those. But we're going to give you a view of from Verint's lens, right, what we're looking at and how we're addressing a lot of the points that Ian made, as well as what we're seeing with our customers here and how we're helping them become successful with their conversational AI solutions. So we're working under a theme at Verint as far as making your self-service smarter. And what do we mean by smarter? It's a combination of things, and we'll talk through that here over the next couple of slides. The first part in making it smarter is to really understand that everything has changed, right? And that we are really dealing with a new reality. And though call volumes and stress and emotions and emergencies and uncertainties are all on the increase, we know that resource availability, sometimes experience, because we're either having to onboard new folks or put them into different skill sets within the contact center that maybe they haven't been fully exposed and trained on, knowledge and IT support and even peer support as people are working remote are decreasing, right? And so those new factors, right, lead us to take a look at kind of a new visibility and a new, what we're referring to as an 80-20 strategy. Ian noted the need to make sure that you continue to have agents supporting those very necessary conversations, right? So we're not going to come to you with a message around automate everything, right? Technically, you can automate everything, but our message is very much focused on really understanding where and how to automate successfully. That's what makes our smart kind of self-service. And we know that the conversations that require a lot of empathy and human touch, especially right now, are so critical to be able to keep with your agents, while we take the automation approach with the rest of the components and support from that standpoint. So it has changed. I think it's become super important to understand that. So let's talk a little bit about Verint and customer service with conversational AI. So certainly, Verint is an organization you may or may not know. We've had about 15 years of real-world experience in deploying AI for our customers, many large customers. And we support multi-channel and dynamic messaging for both voice and digital experiences with our conversational AI. And we're allowing you through this experience and through the technologies and solutions that we bring to really achieve a lot of the top and bottom line results, both that Ian discussed, right, with customer experience as well as operational costs. And you should demand, right, those business results as you're taking a look at this and you're making investments in the future, especially post-COVID. And AI-powered insights really is kind of driving that sustainable bridge between you and your company and your either employees, which are super critical right now, and your customers, right? So those insights that we gather from using conversational AI, super powerful. A couple of those results here that you guys, I think, should be able to demand and take a look at is as far as call deflection, cost reduction, decreasing in time for customers to even reset a password or perform tasks. That was one of the use cases that Ian gave you. And cost reduction in live chat. Listen, these are all areas that we have delivered, measurable, tangible results for our customers from our Verint approach. I'm going to talk to you about why that is. But these are all things that we can look forward to, right, when we're deploying this type of technology. It really is all about developing a successful journey, and that journey is a lot of what Ian talked about in his steps. And quite honestly, there's a lot of what he talked about even from kind of his last recommendations and super critical. And so let's take a look a little bit about that when we talk about smarter IVAs at scale. And I will say it wouldn't be a good presentation, right, if we didn't have 3 or 4 different acronyms. But whether you're referring to conversational AI and how that's defined and supported by Forrester, or you're taking a look at chatbots or IVAs, what we're talking about is automating and having AI employees, right? And those AI employees can provide a number of different value, right, to your customer, whether that be your internal employees or your external customers. And in conjunction, it also can drive a number of different value chains, right, within your enterprise. And we see the need to scale this, right, based on differences within where you are in the organization. And so everything from kind of more fact-based, transactional type solutions with information desks or answer questions, all the way to that coaching experience where perhaps the virtual, AI employee is doing something for you that you didn't even know you had to do, or your customers didn't even know you had to do. And when we take a look at Verint and say, okay, what are our key things when we kind of look at an enterprise approach to conversational AI, we call out 6 different things. I'm going to really focus probably on 2 of these that Ian brought up as well, and I'll say they're as such. The integration platform is certainly critical. He mentioned in his last recommendation bullet, data and context is key. And we always say content is king and context is queen, right? Because she rules the roost. But at the end of the day, being able to do those types of integrations, whether they be pre-built or whether they be open systems, is super critical. And Verint has invested a lot of money and time in order to support that. The other piece that Ian mentioned in this was also the expert technologist. And think of it as a managed service. And I will say that this has shifted quite a bit here in the last probably year or so. Lots of organizations wanted to build this type of solution themselves, and that was fine. There were ways to do that. But what we're looking at right now is that the expertise of deploying these types of capabilities for 15 years are very valuable, and that we're here to kind of help you through that. Obviously, seamless connections to the rest of Verint or contact center portfolios is critical, and having great intent libraries are critical as well. Knowing where to start and grow, Ian spent some time talking about, start with the right use case. And Verint's actually developed a whole process around this called the AI Blueprint. And in summary, what it is very much a data-driven development approach. So we take information and conversations that you're having, and then we show you as an organization a roadmap to success, meaning what conversations that you have can we easily integrate and automate, and which ones should we not do, and make sure that we've got good handoff and seamless integrations to our live agents. There are ways to look at these conversations that you're having to be able to really say, based on their tendencies, these would make good conversational AI solutions and these would not. And so doing a successful AI blueprint for your organization helps you kind of guarantee your success with that. The second piece I would talk about is that, as Ian mentioned, when you look at relying or engaging somebody who has experience, what we've been able to do is over the past 15 years and working with multiple different industries is develop kind of a starter pack for you. So these are key areas and use cases that we've seen as an organization have got great automation capabilities and successful results. The packs are all built around KPIs and business value and able to kind of show how and where we can achieve that for you. And it allows you to start faster and smarter, right? So Ian mentioned, let's make sure that we go slowly to find the use cases, and that's what an AI blueprint does for you. But when you're ready to go, then let's go really fast, right? And let's get something out there and start driving value with it and then being able to grow and expand off of it using those same capabilities. And those are the types of solutions and offers that Verint has in order to enable you on kind of what we think is an exciting journey around conversational AI, and one, quite honestly, that will become more and more critical as we move forward out of this current situation and move towards recovery. Most important thing that I'll leave you with here before we get into questions is you do not have to settle, right? When people think about this, they think sometimes that this is a innovation investment or we'll try and maybe it'll fail. And the reality is that you can deliver results today, right? And not only can we deliver results today, it is important to understand that you have something that can enable that future scale and what you're looking to do. So as Ian mentioned, start with a defined use case that'll drive value. Do very much evidence-based development. We have a couple of examples of this with the work from home assistant that we've built and offered for Verint customers, an AI blueprint. Invest in an enterprise solution that will grow with you. Multiple use cases. What happens when you have to do 3 or 4 of these different use cases, or 10 or 20 of these different use cases? How will you handle the orchestration of that? How will you make sure that you have a comprehensive enough intent capabilities to scale to that level? Demand and expect an ROI. Demand real results. The technology is mature enough. The expertise is available. You should expect nothing less. And that really comes as kind of the best practices from the managed services. And then finally, enterprise support for your agents and employees. When we talk about conversational AI, we talk about agents, employees, and customers. They are all critical right now. Supporting our internal employees, supporting our agents with conversational AI and the solutions that we have and how you can leverage this is equally important as supporting our customers, because we know that if we have well-engaged and supported agents and employees, that we will have well-engaged and supported customers. So those are kind of my 4 leading points for you as well, kind of building off of Ian's point. Certainly has been a pleasure talking with you. Look forward to some of your questions here in real time. And with that, I will hand it back over to Jen.
Thank you both very much. That was very well done and very well put together and very informative. So it does look like we have some questions coming in. And since we do have a few minutes, Ian, I think this one is for you. The warm handoff to agents is a key element for a great experience in certain cases. Is there any material that speaks to balanced staffing models? For example, how adding chat affects call volume?
So, as I showed, the dimension data thinks that your overall volumes are going to go up. Forrester's own data also shows that most brands are expecting staffing to actually increase to handle the increase in digital volumes. So yes, you may actually see a reduction in the offline channels like phone, but it doesn't mean that you're definitely going to need fewer people, unfortunately. I wish, well, maybe I don't wish it were so. It's probably good for my job if we have more contact center agents in the world. The other thing that's worth noting is some lessons that some brands are only starting to actually dig into because of this crisis. We're actually seeing a lot of brands trying to actively shift volume from the offline world to the online world, right? So having an IVR that will then send out an SMS link that either will deep link into chat within an app or chat within mobile web or whatever it is. And often that's front-ended with an IVA or conversational AI experience. So what we're seeing there is that there is very large uptake, but the data is so idiosyncratic right now because if the alternative is, you know, a 3-hour wait time, of course consumers are going to take it. If we were back to maybe more normal volumes, it's hard to tell exactly what's going to happen. The theory is that there's going to be a category of interactions where consumers will definitely avail themselves of those online experiences. And then there are some that may be demographic driven where, you know, certain age groups just are going to wait the 10 minutes to speak to an agent when queue times are back to normal. But we don't have that lesson because we've only really seen huge amounts of deployment of that technology in the last 6 to 8 weeks. So TBD on kind of how well we're going to be able to actively shift the volume in the direction that we want, which would then give you obviously a lot more control over your staffing models. Tracy, I don't know if you've seen, you know, something different coming at it from the IVA side.
Yeah, I would say it's probably consistent with what you mentioned. You know, it is critical, we think, in this time, right, to be able to move between channels, right, continue to keep customer preference and choice when it comes to channels that they want to be served. And the key in that is being able to make sure that you're sharing that context that you mentioned that's so critical. And, you know, there are lots of people right now are in situations, organizations, and as well as their consumers where you have a fairly insatiable appetite for new channels and new ways that you can integrate. I would just say that being able to kind of solve this puzzle for each enterprise, which will look a little bit different, but be able to have the different components that they do, having that flexibility, I think, is key. And also, as we continue to learn more, right, and provide different guidance on where and how we're seeing that shift, the ability to be able to kind of grow and flex with that, I think, is super important.
Great. So the next question, I think it can go for both of you as well, and maybe we'll start with you, Tracy. Our company has a few different bot pilots and projects going, each owned by different groups within the organization. Do we need to pick a single solution, or do you see other organizations with the same approach, and what do you recommend we consider?
Yeah, okay. So we actually see a lot of organizations that have a marketing group that has deployed a bot and a different customer service group that's deployed a bot. Maybe HR has with some of their solutions and they've deployed a different bot. We would never come, I think, from the approach of a, closed stack where you have to only have one solution, right? Those certain scenarios where people have multiple different kind of technologies or bots supporting them, they're all serving a purpose, right? And it could be very use case specific, and so we support that. Our approach kind of in those scenarios would be what is critical is sharing the insights and understanding what's happening with those conversations across the organization. And so by having the tools to be able to take in what's going on with each of those bots and really kind of orchestrate and understand the insights so that you can help make decisions across the organization will become more and more critical. Because if we think about this, it's not just a single thing, right? It's not just a single conversational AI employee or a conversational, or a single bot. It's really what we believe will become a staffing of AI employees that are all performing certain functions, and in Compact form those together or form those separately, but they all need to be brought together with insights and intelligence. So we would say if in that instance, you're not alone. We see a lot of companies and organizations that have deployed a lot of these. We don't feel you have to lock into a single solution or a vendor, but we do think you have to lock into some single insights and some orchestration. Ian, what are your thoughts?
Pretty similar to yours. I'm not going to spend a huge amount of time because I think you hit most of it, Tracy, but I will say that some brands are also looking at an orchestration function for sort of their bot, their top level bot platform, right? And so yes, you can build whatever you want in Dialogflow or Lex or whatever, but the actual experiential decisions are going to be made by a different platform. So essentially, the master bot is invoking a child bot or slave bot, servant bot, whatever you want to call it, for specific areas. So the marketing team, for example, as Tracy said, if that's what's required. The reason that the brands are doing that is they want to actually allow the line of business some control over their specific domain, because they know it best, but provide some level of standardization on the experiential side so that consumers don't feel kind of a whiplash, right, when they're dealing with marketing versus when they're dealing with sales versus when they're dealing with service. But otherwise, everything that Tracy said would have been my answer as well.
Thank you.
And my final thing that I would add in there.
Oh, go ahead. Go ahead.
I was going to say, Jen, and the only other piece that I would add in there, if we think of it as managing a workforce, right, and from a Verint's perspective, right, that's what we take a look at doing is managing the workforce, and that's a lot of kind of that orchestration that I mentioned and that Ian talked about as well. Just extremely important, right, as we move forward, and quite honestly, that's why I think Verint's super excited about where conversational AI will be going and how we can be a general part of that. Go ahead, Jen.
Oh yeah, we've got quite a few more questions. I think we may have time for maybe one or two more. So Ian, when you talked about internal support for your agents and how to leverage bots in that mix, can you talk more about the relationship between a knowledge management system and a bot? Like, where does one start and one stop? How does that relationship go?
Right, so there are definitely brands who think that the bot is simply a conversational interface to a knowledge management system, right? So that not on the agent side, but on the consumer side. And I don't know about you, but I find those experiences very frustrating because I didn't ask for a knowledge article, I asked for an answer, right? And until we have the ability to truly do natural language generation and summarization out of knowledge articles into a pithy answer, that sounds conversational, that seems conversational, I just find those experiences extremely substandard. On the agent side, it's a different story, right? Agents are used to handling knowledge articles or handling interactions with the assistance of knowledge articles. And there, as I mentioned, one of the uses could be pushing knowledge articles to an agent. But the suggestions of conversational snippets that I mentioned can also be pulled from knowledge articles with the key distinction that I was just talking about on the consumer side. Knowledge articles are not written to be conversational. They don't read like a conversation. There's no reason for them to have been written that way. That's not what they are. They're not process flows or process maps, those kinds of things. They're a collection of all of the things that an agent might need to solve a customer's problem. If you want to use it as the sort of core corpus for creating those knowledge snippets that can be pushed to agents, you actually do need to have manual work. Again, this is where hiring experts can come in and say, you want this to sound like a natural person-to-person conversation. Let's actually go through the appropriate knowledge articles, map the intents, but also take the dialogues from those knowledge articles and make them actually a dialogue, right? Actually seem like something conversational. So they can be a core part of the conversational experience, but you can't just use them to push information out either to agents or consumers and expect to have a conversational experience, because that won't happen.
Yeah, definitely. So we have quite a few more questions coming in. We'll have to follow up with those over email, so we'll get back to you with answers on those. Before we wrap up, you can see that link right there and click it if you like. That's for our final webinar to register for the Adapt and Respond series happening on Thursday at 1 p.m. Eastern, featuring another Forrester analyst, Megan Burns, on customer experience transformation. So you can go ahead and click that and register if you want to follow up with the resource list after this. And you're not going to want to miss the new Verint virtual event happening May 20th through the 21st. This will be an online, free virtual customer engagement event. It's an excellent opportunity to network, learn about new and different Verint products, and plug into a community of peers and even subject matter experts like Tracy and others. I urge you to check it out if you're interested in learning more about Verint's industry-leading self-service solutions and other award-winning products. You can go ahead and register by going to that URL below. And then last but not least, if you want more information or materials or to check out any of the previous webinars we did on demand, you can access all those materials from the resource tab or clicking on the link. Thank you again so much for joining us, Ian, as well as Tracy. This has been great. I hope you all have a great rest of your day. Be well, stay healthy. Cheers.